I think the important thing for people to realize with crypto is that like the main asset that deserves attention is Bitcoin.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you can't play around with other stuff, but they're not like Bitcoin can be construed as a good long-term investment, especially depending on what your time horizon is. But the altcoin market, in my opinion, cannot be. Like you can make good short-term trades where maybe you hold like an altcoin for a year or two, but it's more of a casino than anything else. And one of the best examples for the majority of the altcoin market being a casino is think about how a lot of exchanges pivoted to prediction markets after altcoin interest died out. So that's kind of evidence right there that it's essentially a casino. But there's also not really a great point in trying to convince people not to trade the casino. It's like if I went to Las Vegas and stood outside of a casino and told people not to go in, is anyone going to listen to me? No, they're there to gamble. If you look at the ROI of Bitcoin from the low, I know we want to make it seem more complicated, but this cycle topped on day 1062 as measured from the bottom, and the cycle before that topped on day 1059, and the cycle before that topped on day 1068. So despite all the differences that both of us can point to, it still topped when it always does. And and then if you extend the cycle out to see the next bear market low, like right there, you can see Bitcoin topped every cycle when it always does. It entered into a bear market just as it always has. And if you look at the year-to-date ROI, if you exclude the drawdown from late last year and just look at the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin in 2026, and if you compare it to the average of prior midterm years and throw on a standard deviation to that average, we're still generally tracking the average of prior midterm years, despite all the narratives, despite the conflict going on in Iran, despite oil spiking. It's still playing out more or less just like it always has.
That was Ben, one of the most accurate on-chain cycle analysts in crypto. And what he just said should stop every single person watching this dead in their tracks. Because right now the entire world is focused on the Iran war, oil spiking, Trump's Truth Social posts, the Fed, the macro. And this guy pulls up a chart and says none of it matters. The cycle topped when it always tops. It's playing out exactly like it always plays out. He's giving only a 25% chance the bottom is already in. And he's about to show you exactly what the data says happens next. To Bitcoin, to altcoins, and where the smart money is actually going right now. No hype, no hopium, just a cycle. Let's get into it.
The same price basically since early February, just between like 60, 75K or so. But I mean, look, this is not your first midterm year with crypto either. I mean, it's pretty common to see a sell-off into the early part of the midterm year and then just kind of get this period where there's really low volatility for really long period of time. In fact, in 2018, Bitcoin dropped to $6,000 and then basically held $6,000 as support from February until November. And then it all changed at the end of the year. So it's not that different from what we've previously seen. My guess is we'll continue to see more of the same.
So it did change at the end of the year that time, but it very quickly went down below and very quickly bounced back to 6,000, right? I remember that night I had put in stink bids, hoping maybe Bitcoin one day would go to 4,000 if ever it happened to break down. I woke up in the morning and price was still 6,000, and it took me like 5 hours until I knew that I had filled and was up 50%.
Nice.
But,
yeah, I mean, 2020 was good too.
Yeah, but that was one of the craziest days. But I mean, that begs the question now, if we chop sideways in this range for many more months, is that accumulation and then we head back up like some of the markets, or is that the desperation 6,000 breaks down and it feels like the world is over?
I mean, I think if we were to go below 60K, like let's say we were to go to like the 30 to 50K range or something, that would be, I think, as far as a lot of the indicators go, that would be a fairly convincing bottom, right? Like in terms of what historically has signaled major market lows for Bitcoin. And by the way, like Bitcoin could go theoretically back up to 80K, but that doesn't necessarily mean the low is in. Ask me like, what's the probability, right? I think that's important because no one fully knows. I would say the likelihood that the low is in is probably only like 25%. Okay, it's not like it's impossible, but I would say it's much more likely that we do eventually go lower. And I guess the main bull case is that if this is like the 2019 sort of post-digestion phase after a non-euphoric top, if you look at that and say, all right, well, let's just compare this bear market to that bear market, it kind of looks similar. But even in that case, what happened is you had a rally and then you had a recession induced by the pandemic. Perhaps we have a recession just induced by something else. Maybe it's induced by, you know, something up. Maybe it's induced by the fact that inflation is going higher because oil prices are spiking and the Fed can't cut as aggressively as they need to
Maybe
because
it's
inflation.
nukes. Maybe it's nukes.
I mean, I don't. The thing is, what's crazy to me is the fact that people like that's where we are. You know, like I hate that that's where it has become, but just the fact that that's the rhetoric now is a little scary. If you look at the social metrics, you can see that basically social interest has been trending down since 2021, right? Like retail has been leaving the crypto space, not sort of coming to it. And this metric's created by, we added to it. It used to just be, you know, Twitter follower or X followers for crypto accounts on YouTube. Now it also includes things like Coinbase app ranking and Google Trends for Bitcoin. And by the way, I mean, it's just been generally decreasing since 2021. And so when you look at this, when you color code Bitcoin's price with the social interest, you can see that we kind of topped on apathy, not euphoria. So in a lot of ways, it's different from prior market cycle tops. There was also no rotation from Bitcoin to altcoins after Bitcoin topped. And this is more symbolic of what happened in 2019, where altcoins topped, then Bitcoin topped, and then you kind of rolled down the risk curve where then stocks and then gold ended up topping as well. But there was no rotation. Like once the higher risk things topped, there was not a rotation, or sorry, once the lower risk things topped, there was not a rotation to higher risk things. But if you look at alt Bitcoin pairs, like when alt Bitcoin pairs came to the range, like down here to the lows in 2019 after Bitcoin topped, a lot of people would like look at this chart and be like, oh, this means Altseason has to happen because they've completely bled out. But after altcoins went down to the lows, they then went sideways for a very long time against Bitcoin. And the reason they went sideways was because Bitcoin then entered into a bear market, right? So what happened on 1010, I know a lot of people say it was like, you know, it was this crazy event, but the weakness in altcoins was always there. Like altcoins have been bleeding to Bitcoin for like 4 or 5 years before that event happened, just like they had been bleeding to Bitcoin for many, many years before we had the big capitulations we had in 2019 with altcoins basically completely round tripping all of their, you know, tight monetary policy bull market gains. So I think that, you know, we're kind of in a similar zone now with higher risk assets as we were back over there. And the only way, in my opinion, to sort of get back to the times that people want is to just go through this time-based capitulation where, you know, people just kind of give up. And unfortunately, I don't like it. I mean, it would be way better for my own channel and everything if the bull market could come back and I would have a reason to be bullish on this stuff. But by the way, I mean, just because Bitcoin and crypto have been in a bear market, that doesn't mean you can't make money, right? I mean, energy stocks, manufacturing stocks, they've been doing incredibly well. And metals were doing pretty well earlier this year. So I think, you know, people can still make money in bear markets for crypto. You just have to be willing to branch out a little bit.
Yeah, they have to go to hyper liquid and YOLO into 100x perps on oil prices. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that was one potential option. The other option is if you look every year, every midterm year, Bitcoin always bleeds to gold. It always bleeds to the stock market, and it always bleeds to energy stocks. If you look at like yearly candles of Bitcoin, like if you look at Bitcoin USD divided by, say, XLE, you know, and just look at yearly candles, you can see that every midterm year, Bitcoin bleeds to energy, right? Like in 2014, Bitcoin dropped 51% against energy stocks. In 2018, down 66%. 2022, down 77%. So far this year, down 36%. So midterm years, if we just accept that they are generally bear markets for crypto, it doesn't mean you have to sit around and twiddle your thumbs and complain about it for a year. You can just go make money somewhere else.
Yeah, I heard you talking about altcoins and showing that they bottomed and kind of went sideways, and all I could think about was Lloyd Christmas and Dumb and Dumber saying, "So you're saying there's a chance?"
Right? Yeah. Just because they've kind of like sort of found at least a local low against Bitcoin doesn't mean they're going up on their USD pairs, because they bottomed against Bitcoin locally at around the same time that Bitcoin then entered into a bear market. And if you think about it logically, and I think altcoins are still going to keep bleeding to Bitcoin actually in the short term. if you think about it, it makes sense because altcoins already got annihilated in the bull market. Like, think about how many altcoins are at their 2022 lows rather than close to their 2025 high or their 2021 highs. So, and by the way, if you think about this too, if you look at the Russell 2000 against, say, the NASDAQ, the only time in history where the Russell was like durably outperforming the NASDAQ started in the .com era. Like when the .com bubble popped, that's
they
when
literally had to die for them to lose to the Russell, right?
Right, basically what happened. And so if you think about it, it makes sense because in the bull market, all the blue chips did really, really well back then, right? You had the tech boom, you had Cisco, you had a lot of different tech stocks that were doing really well. The micro caps, they got annihilated in the bull market because no one wanted to buy them because they wanted to chase the gains in the blue chips. But then once the blue chips entered into a bear market, the micro caps had already gotten annihilated. They were already down 90%. So with the blue chips falling, it allowed the Russell to go up against the NASDAQ, but the Russell didn't go anywhere on its USD valuation, right? Like it still, like during this, when the .com bubble popped, the Russell still went down. It's just that they had all, like, if you look at the Russell's performance before .com, they had just gone sideways for years. Like they hadn't done anything. So that's kind of the thing that I would tell people, like, be careful what you wish for, because if we ever truly get to a point where altcoins are starting to durably outperform Bitcoin and we're not in a bull market, you might go into a period where altcoins are outperforming Bitcoin, but it could be for all the wrong reasons. It could just be because Bitcoin was then now in a bear market and your altcoin was still going down. It just wasn't going down as quickly as Bitcoin. We haven't entered into that period yet because altcoins are still bleeding to Bitcoin, but it is something that could happen at some point.
It's coming, man. We all know that coin number 473 on CoinMarketCap is going to overperform for at least a week somewhere in there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the important thing for people to realize with crypto is that, like, the main asset that deserves attention is Bitcoin.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you can't play around with other stuff, but they're not, like, Bitcoin can be construed as a good long-term investment, especially depending on what your time horizon is. But the altcoin market, in my opinion, cannot be. Like, you can make good short-term trades where maybe you hold like an altcoin for a year or two, but it's more of a casino than anything else. And one of the best examples for the majority of the altcoin market being a casino is, think about how a lot of exchanges pivoted to prediction markets after altcoin interest died up. So that's kind of evidence right there that it's essentially a casino. But there's also not really a great point in trying to convince people not to trade the casino. It's like, if I went to Las Vegas and stood outside of a casino and told people not to go in, is anyone going to listen to me? No, they're there to gamble.
The cycle topped on the same day it always does. Social interest has been declining since 2021. The bottom is only 25% likely to already be in, and altcoins are bleeding exactly like they always bleed in midterm years. But here's what Ben also said. This doesn't mean you sit on your hands. Energy stocks, manufacturing, metals, international markets. The money doesn't disappear in a crypto bear market. It just moves. And the people who understand cycles know exactly where it goes. The next bull market is coming. The data says so. But first, the cycle has to finish what it started. Nothing here is financial advice. Do your own research. If this gave you clarity on where we actually are right now, subscribe. We do this every week. Drop a comment. Do you think the bottom is already in? See you in the next one.